Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. Hi, Joe. It's great to see you here today. And there are a few of you who are joining from the UK. So thank you for doing so after typical working hours. I definitely know all of you today, but I am Barb. I am the Director of Community Engagement here at the OEN. And I am incredibly excited about today's topic, which highlights the OEN's collaboration with our UK members in support of building a broader regional OER community of practice for the UK and Ireland. I've had the opportunity to work very closely with the initiative over the past year as a member of the advisory group. Um, it's been a really neat way to collaborate more directly with our UK members and also get a chance to learn more and also kind of feel the really neat energy of the open education movement happening in the region. So I had thought it would be kind of a neat topic, perhaps, to share for our February community conversation, and our event planning committee agreed that that would be an exciting thing to share about today. So here we are. We are lucky to be joined by David Beales, University Librarian at Brunel University of London. David is the one who first approached our team about supporting efforts to build a community in the region based on our own experience of doing so, as you all know so well, here in the OEN for the past 12 years. And needless to say, we were really honored and excited to be invited to do that. David is the chair of the Community of Practices Advisory Group, and he's also one of the newest members of our OEN Steering Committee. So we're really excited to have him now on our leadership team and kind of being the bridge between those two communities. I've got another question for you all before we get started. This is the first time that we are kind of publicly highlighting in an event the work that's been happening in the OER Community of Practice for the UK and Ireland and how we've been collaborating on that. I'm going to share a poll to see. Again, this is the first time I've done this in a long time. Here we go. Thumbs up if you see a poll. Okay. Just kind of see where each of you are at in terms of your familiarity. Um, Oops, relaunch poll. All right, let's try that again. So if you want to answer, and sorry if you have to answer again if you already did, maybe you're newer to the concept and excited to learn about it. Maybe you've heard about it before and are looking for an update, or the last option is I actively engage with the OER community of practice. All right, well, we are a small group, so I'm going to end this and share the results. You can see, all right, most people here are kind of newer to it. A couple who are here for the updates. And then I do want to note we've got actively engaged from two other people who are here. I want to note that one of those is Helen Moore of the University of Sheffield, who is also on the advisory group with David and I. And then, hi, Joe McPhee, also David's colleague at Brunel. And those two lead Train the Trainer Introduction to OER Adoption workshops for that community. So just want to applaud them for their work. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. Without further ado, I am going to pass the mic to David, and he's going to talk about kind of the origin story of how this came to be, what the community has been up to in its first year of existence, and where it's headed in the future. And then I do want to note that this is pretty conversational, so we'll have time at the end for Q&A or maybe discussion about possible ways that our two communities can learn from one another. So David, go ahead. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Barb. Do you know the most stressful part of this, because I don't use Zoom, is I was just practicing 2 seconds ago how to share my screen. I think I've got it. There we go. Has that worked? Yes. Lovely. Right. Okay. I am David Beales, the University Librarian at Brunel University of London. I'm really pleased, by the way, that both Helen and Joe are here because I've worked with them a lot over the last couple of years. I am very self-conscious about the fact that we have new branding and I've used the old branding on this presentation, and Joe will know. So I'm feeling guilty already. So what I thought I would do, just to go through my background in OERs, and it has shaped the way I think about open education resources. And particularly over the last, I'm going to say 10 years, within the UK, there has been a shift in attitude. And so I'll talk about why that's happened. Then we'll go on to the OER Community of Practice, what we are doing at the moment and our future plans. And Joe and Helen, particularly at the end, where if there's anything that you would want to highlight, I am more than happy for you to talk about your future plans as well. But I have a question before I start, and I've asked Barb to monitor the chat on this. That is the average student debt in the USA. This was from something I was looking up just over the weekend. I want people in the chat to guess what the average student debt is in the UK at the end of their 3-year course. So whilst you are thinking about that, and Barb will let me know in a couple of minutes how people are doing on that, I'll tell you just a little bit about Brunel and keep it really brief, just so you have an understanding of what we're about. So I'm going to say that we are a research-intensive university. We aspire probably to be slightly higher in the league tables than we are. We are about in the top 40 in the UK. So I'm going to say we're okay. We're what we would call a challenger university. We have about 18,000 students, 1,300 academics. I think the thing that stands out for us at Brunel is our international outlook. So we're top 3 in the UK for our international outlook. Over 70% of our student population comes from ethnic minority backgrounds, and over 38% of our students are international students. So that's something we're particularly proud of. We're also proud of the employability of our students. So there's a huge focus on that on campus. And that I should also mention that those 18,000 students are supported in the library. We've got 42 posts in the library. And I was talking to a colleague of mine recently. It's quite interesting that there used to be about 120 library staff not that long ago. Say 7 or 8 years ago, would have been 120. And we have shrunk down. So we have an academic skills team. We have an open research and rights team who are really heavily involved in research impact across campus. And then all the other things that you would expect, as well as our archive and special collections team as well. Right. So that was the little filler whilst people work out what student debt was. Barb, can you tell me, was anyone close to that number, $68,683?
It was more, Robin made a comment about thinking it was higher, and Jen guessed double, which is interesting because in the beginning, David asked the event planning committee and I what we thought it was, and we were like, oh, it's definitely lower than the US, and had guessed about 6,000 pounds, I think it was. So yeah, good job, Robin and Jen.
I still saw your expression, Robin. I think we all gasped. Yeah. So that there's if you have a look at the Observer newspaper, it's free to register to look at that. There's a really good article about it. There is a spread of debt, a wider spread of debt in the US than there is in the UK. But that debt that students carry with them has a huge influence, obviously, on the choices they are making. But it also has a huge influence on the choices we make as a university and as a library, and the expectations that our students have of us. I'm going to come back to those 3 questions at the end. We'll see whether they resonate with people as I go through the presentation today. But I want us to think about the assumptions that we carry with us. So I'm going to talk about my career in a second, and some of the assumptions that I have carried with me at each stage in my career have really shaped where I am right now. And one of the things I've also noticed is how we tend to get in our own way when we want to make changes. There's a lot of received wisdom that says, well, actually, there's a good reason why we don't need to make a change, or that won't work. And that's something I've heard a lot over the last 20 years. So as we get to thinking about that, this is some of these things. I think I just wanted to show some of the things that we share in common. We don't need to read through this whole page, but just showing that there is a cost of living price impact on students here, as there was in the US and still is in the US. We have a food bank at Brunel. A lot of universities do. And students are having to make, this is not news to anyone here, students are having to make really difficult decisions. I don't believe textbooks should be one of those decisions. This relatively straightforward graphic there, you can see also student study behaviors, the number of students who have to work through their degree, some of them taking on second jobs. Those who are lucky enough to turn to their parents for financial support, 45%. A lot of them at our university don't have that luxury either. And that 33% of students who are skipping meals, cutting food costs, they're making those choices on heating and food, and they're making those choices on the resources they need to spend their money on at university. So all of that is a shared background that we have. Okay, so now I get to this will be really quick on my career history, but there's a theme that comes through it. I'm going to say that one in green, head of library services at the Institute of Cancer Research. The reason that is green is because that was the only year in the last 20 years where I have not worked somewhere where there has been a budget crisis. So when I was at King's College London, we had a journals budget crisis, which meant that for 2 years in a row, we couldn't buy books. When I was at Imperial College London, I was there for 3 years. For 3 years in a row, the library had a 10% budget cut entirely on staff every year for 3 years. When I was at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, I joined there just at the end of the furlough scheme, where staff were taking a day off every 2 weeks and not being paid for that. And we were incredibly short-staffed the entire time that I was there at Cal Poly, and it took a long time to gear back up to recruiting people. So then when I returned to the UK, Institute of Cancer Research, what a lovely year that was. I had so many things I could do. There wasn't, no one was talking about budgets at all. And then I joined the House of Commons Library in 2016, and that was during austerity. So our government at the time was very much talking about cutting down on government spending, and that included the House of Commons Library. So I spent the entire 6 years there where we had salary freezes, we weren't recruiting, our resources budget in the library was pretty much frozen as well. And that was what people were thinking about. And now I've come to Brunel and I'm having a great time, must say, but we have just gone through, as a lot of UK universities have, we've just gone through a really difficult time. And a lot of universities are doing it this year as well, with redundancies, staff cuts that we don't tend to publicly share the numbers. They are eye-watering, and there are about 70% of universities in the UK are either currently in deficit or they expect to be in deficit this year, next financial year. And that all influences the choices that they make. So that's 20 years of cutting and cutting and cutting away at the resources that we have. And very rarely have I been in an institution where we put anything back once that crisis was averted. And I think that's particularly influenced a lot of the thinking around how we support our students, because it's been invisible. Um, and we've cut away. We often talk about how we support our students, but those cuts have made that much more difficult. So I'm going to come to that in a bit more detail later. And just for background, by the way, Joe will know that's our lecture theatre right in the middle. That was from A Clockwork Orange. So that brutally austere building in the middle, right next door to the library, but I really like that picture. The one on the left is the Morn Library at King's College London, which I can tell you, by the way, was the first fireproof building in the UK. So that's a claim to fame. And that one in the House of Commons Library, that's the inquiry desk there. So that's just the different places that I have worked. But you will notice I was working in California for a short while. So for about 3.5 years, I was working in San Luis Obispo. So this was during those redundancies at Imperial. And I thought, rather than go through all that for a third year in a row, I'd do something fun. So I went to San Luis Obispo. And if you haven't spotted me yet, there I am, right at the back. And I was an associate librarian, so I was on the tenure track. Part of what I was having to do there was I was an engineering librarian. So I moved from being team leader down to engineering librarian. I also worked on library impact. But one of the first questions that I had when I arrived there was where the textbooks were for the students. And it really did. I'm going to say it blew my mind that libraries do not provide textbooks for students. And you can see some examples here. This is just a random library textbook policy.edu. And those were the first results when I conducted that search. Pretty much every library. I know there are a few exceptions. They choose not to. Do you know what? That's an assumption right there. I would love to know why libraries. This was the question I asked at Cal Poly. Why should we not be providing textbooks for students? And there's lots of answers about, well, this is the way that the library works. And there's lots of ways you can qualify why the library should not be providing textbooks. But it was a real shock to me because if I just go to, there we go. This is what it would look like in the UK. So this was a search I did yesterday, library textbook policy.ac.uk. And I know that's an AI overview, but I recognize those libraries, Queen Mary University, Newman University, and City St. George's. They're all Queen Mary and City, they're decent universities, particularly with a research background. Newman University, more teaching led. Those policies are broadly right. I think a lot of them, some of them may be a little out of date now. But what you can see there is the assumption is that we in the UK would provide textbooks for students in our libraries. And I'm not sure if anyone here has worked for the Open Education Network long enough to know Sarah Fay Cohen. She was my line manager at San Luis Obispo. And to her credit, when I said, why are we not providing textbooks in the US, she did actually take that really seriously. And so she started the Open and Affordable Textbook Scheme at Cal Poly, and that was 2012, maybe 2013. And it was through that work that she became aware of the Open Textbook Library. And Cal Poly was one of the first, I think we were the fifth university in the US to join the Open Textbook Library at that time. And then Sarah Fay Cohen and Karen Lawrenson, a colleague of mine, who many of you will know as well, they moved on to the Open Education Network because they got so heavily involved in San Luis Obispo. So that work was really helpful to me as well in challenging my own perceptions about, well, if all of these highly qualified librarians who I'm working with in the US are blind to something that I think is absolutely, it should be the exact opposite, then what are the assumptions that I'm carrying with me in the other things that I think about with my work? So that was really important to me in my career. By the way, if anyone does want to work in other countries, it's a really helpful thing to know that librarianship is a specialist occupation. So in the US, it's an H-1B visa, but you can work pretty much anywhere in the world. My plan was to work in the US for the 6 years the H-1B visa allowed me to, come back to the UK. I came back a bit quicker for very happy personal reasons. But when I came back to the UK, I came back to the Institute of Cancer Research. So I wasn't involved with working with students, but I did take away that idea that we should be working on open textbooks. And I was met with, I think I've used that phrase before, polite indifference. I know the Open Education Network conducted some research. I think this is related to the UK Open Textbook Report from 2019 here. But what they found was people they were talking to were saying, well, the situation is different in the UK. We have more academic freedom. We're not so textbook led. The library supplies the textbooks, so students don't suffer anywhere near as much as we felt they did in the US. I genuinely didn't get it at the time, but I didn't have an opportunity to work with anyone on this because I went from the Institute of Cancer Research straight into the House of Commons. And I was in the House of Commons for 6 years, and it's only 3 years ago that I returned to Brunel. And when I did, I then went back and had a look at what's happening in the higher education sector when it comes to textbooks, because I was still motivated, thinking this is something I really want to work on. And what had changed in those intervening 6 years was, you can see there, the university staff urge a probe into ebook pricing scandal. So there's a campaigning group called eBook SOS, which highlights one of the practices we have with academic publishers here is when they recognize a book is particularly popular and may well be a textbook, they will shift that into the premium pricing model. And their goal is to make it that libraries cannot afford to support students in delivering textbooks. particularly that second one there, the ebook campaigners rally against Pearson, Pearson price increases. That was one of the almost like a cause which we all gathered around because Pearson were the most aggressive at doing that. But that bottom one there, the textbook case of crisis, you can see I've highlighted the date from that. That was 1994. We have been in a textbook crisis for at least 30 years and probably more. There were some really actually dull articles. I could have gone back a bit further. We have always been in a textbook crisis. So when I was saying before that my work in Cal Poly helped me challenge the way I naturally thought, one of the things that really helped me recognize was when we look at our collection development policies and we have all these assumptions about what we are doing, are they really meeting what we say they do? So one of the things that I'm particularly clear on for me, and Joe will know this at Brunel, is that our collection development policies in the US and the UK, they probably don't match what we say they do. So when we say we provide textbooks for students, what we mean is we will provide textbooks, we will have an informal arrangement with students. If you can meet us where we are, if you are willing to plan ahead, plan your studies, be available to either collect a textbook or however, or make a reservation for a textbook, we will endeavour to give you access to that book. But if you are working one or two jobs, if you are like I was when I was not a model student and really poor at planning, if you are a student who, for instance, with a lot of our international students who have a lot of other pressures and calls on their time, then we don't support you when it comes to textbook provision. And although we will say we do that, and you saw that we would provide any number of textbooks for students, we don't do it. And then on top of that, we're in the middle of another financial crisis. So this one here from, you can see this is 2024, that Vice Chancellor's fear UK sector is hurtling into financial crisis has definitely happened. We at Brunel, we had a huge deficit last year, which we really had to, we're projected to be out of deficit. We're just on the right side where we need to be. There are many universities who are really struggling with deficits of 30, 50, 70 million pounds. There are some universities which are merging. There's a real fear that some universities may be driven, no one knows how this would work, but driven out of business. We just don't know how that will work. But what that does, it produces any number of barriers to our then being able to do what we want to do in the UK. So one of the issues is staffing. It's a really difficult problem that I face is that all the things I want to do, how can I ask people in my team to do that? When, say, for instance, with the liaison librarians, we used to have 8, there are now 6. They have to work with colleagues across campus, so in College of Engineering, but all of the support staff within that college have disappeared. So now they have to forge new relationships. They have to do a whole bunch more work than they ever used to do. It is very difficult to ask people to take on new projects. Where I have a motivation to work on open education resources, other people are just trying to keep the lights on, trying to keep things going. So my priorities is very difficult. I'll be honest with you, I'm doing okay with it, but it is very difficult to keep my priorities in view of people with other really pressing priorities of their own. So there are barriers to what we are trying to do in the UK. But one of the things that I also learned as I went through all this was actually that what I can do is reach out for colleagues to collaborate with, and we can form working groups across multiple institutions. So that was something when I arrived at Brunel, the first thing I looked to do was see, well, who can I form a community with? And that was 3 years ago. The only institution in the UK that was a part of the OEN was Sheffield University. So Helen, who's on the call today, reached out to her. We have been working so closely for the last 3 years nearly. We meet every couple of weeks and we just help each other along the way with what small step are we going to take in the next 2 weeks to help us achieve our goals. So that's how it started, the two of us in the Open Education Network. And that's also when I reached out to Dave Ernst and started talking about how can we build that community in the UK. Um, where we are getting to is now the community of practice. It feels like I've shifted all the work we did in those last 3 years, and it's like, bang, right, we're in the community of practice. But one of the things that, particularly for us at Brunel, that we prioritized, and this is where Joe McPhee, who's on the call, did um, so much work, was on translating the US workshop model to the UK. And so Barb was talking about the fact that Helen and Joe lead those trainer-trainer workshops, which are always they deliberately keep those workshops relatively small to try and encourage that conversation. So maximum number of bookings, I think, is 16. They're fully booked each time. There's a huge appetite for people now really want to do something in this OER space. Um, so that's what Joe has been working on with Helen particularly. When Helen is probably too modest to say this, but the thing that they have at Sheffield, where they were further ahead than a lot of universities, was around publishing support. And it feels very much, we talk about the Publisher 101 a lot, Barb, I know. So we've very much that bootstraps kind of approach. But I look to Helen, particularly at Sheffield, and we look at Kirsten and University of Leeds. They're doing a lot of on the ground work, working with academics on that publication part, but I want to come to that in a moment. So when I started reaching out to build this community of practice, there are some people who are very active in the UK. So Phil Brabham at Coventry University, I'm going to say they were led by, I know the inclusive access model in the US is very controversial. It's not one that I approve of. Phil and Coventry, they went down that approach. I don't think Phil went down that approach, actually. I think it was Coventry went down the approach. They had this grand model. They were going to provide textbooks for every student, and it cost millions of pounds. It cost probably double what my library budget is, and it wasn't even a library budget in Coventry. And they went through the same issues that every other university has gone through. We can't afford that model anymore. So it was a trial by fire for them. They have a mandate now. All of their courses have to be OER led, all of the resources. So that's a huge transition for them. But he's really active, as you can imagine, in that space. And I reached out to Dominic as well because he has a really strong point of view when it comes to campaigning and the reasons why we need to do what we're doing. And I'm going to talk about Hugh and Celine as well. So Hugh and Celine, they represent the Irish libraries in the UK and Ireland. And Celine only joined 2 weeks ago. I think she's a real find. One of the themes that we would draw out from our community practice is that we really want to highlight all these pockets of good practice that are happening everywhere. And she was at a Sconnell event that we hosted a couple of weeks ago. We had 250 attendees for that. And it was the first time I'd heard Celine speaking about the fact they have an OER librarian. They have publishing process where they have, I think, 10 textbooks on the go. I know they've already just done 5, and they have another 10 coming through. So there's a huge amount there that they're doing that no one, I think, had really heard about because they didn't have a channel to be telling people what it was they were doing. And that's one of the key things that we have in this community of practice now. We have a channel with 270 members from 70 institutions who all of them individually have been trying to work out what is it that I can do, but not being connected. And this is how we are able to connect people. And as this advisory group, the way that we work is very collaborative. I would say that Barb and I, we nominally are chairs of the group, but I'm going to, if anyone's done any agile project management, we're more like the scrum masters of it, where we go around and ask what are our seasonal goals? Barb and I, we just had conversations with every member of the advisory group. What are you going to be focusing on for the next year? What is it that your priority is? And then how can this group help you to meet that priority? And for me, I have made commitments. This was just from our most recent meeting. So you can see Tallis and Leganto, our reading list software, I'll talk about in a moment. I have priority to work with colleagues around the country to identify what OERs people are already using and make those available. So we'll talk about that in a second. You can see at the bottom there, Dominic, around community engagement and output. with Hugh and with Phil, we're the more senior level staff who have access to senior staff at universities. So we have an annual priority this year to engage at a senior level with our priorities as well. And then you see that huge gap right in the middle about publishing. And I'm not going to put you on the spot, Helen, but we're going to be talking about that in the next couple of weeks. But this is one of those areas that I want to draw attention to. When I say we kind of we get in our own way sometimes, there is so much we could put in there. And it feels like if we look at what everyone is doing in the US, when we look at the open textbook library and 1,700 titles, and we think, well, what are we doing? Um, there are so many pockets of good practice. I mentioned what Helen is doing at Sheffield. At Leeds University, I was so impressed. We had an event just over a year ago, and they were talking about what they are doing, putting out a call for academics to write textbooks and what support they could offer. I think it was £10,000 on offer to two academics. That was what they could afford. They had so many academics writing in with really good proposals, some of whom said they would take the support, but they didn't need the money for it. They ended up with 6 academics they're now working with at Leeds. So there's so much that Leeds and Sheffield and our colleagues around the UK are already doing in Ireland, already doing around academic publishing. One of our priorities for this year is bringing them all together. And the things that we talk about are around, are there, for instance, shared subject areas like nursing or management where we could write a national textbook and we could draw academics in. But they feel like such big issues to deal with and we don't know how to start. But the principle that Barb and I always go back to is, well, what is the small steps that you can take along the way? So if you have that seasonal goal, just think about what you can do in the next couple of weeks or the next month. What can you do just to get you that little bit further along the way? And opportunities tend to come up. So recently, Barb put me in touch with a colleague at Imperial College London, an academic who is really interested because Imperial is they are a world-leading university. They have for them the work they have to demonstrate they are leading the profession. He wants to be leading the profession in this area, and he wants our help to do that. So we have a contact that we can build on. So I will get in touch with the director of Imperial College London Library, and we will see, is there something we can do in this space? And that's all it is, having a series of conversations. So that's sort of where we are right now. And I realize I have got my slides slightly in a different order, but where we are, we talked about adoption. We've talked about publishing. I've talked about strategic outreach. And there is work we want to do with partnerships. So you'll even see there the OEN community, something I'm really interested in, is working much more closely with colleagues in the US. That exchange of ideas and views, working in different environments, is something I really benefited from before. And I want to continue that process. And I know those conversations I'm going to have will benefit us, and I'm hoping they will benefit my US colleagues as well. I would also say when we were doing the OER workshops, one of the things that Joe mentioned very early on, the barrier we have is we have got so many academics who are really interested, but they couldn't identify from the open textbook library, well, which of these books are relevant to us? This one is too US focused. And they're all the reasons why they wouldn't be able to adopt that textbook. That was a real barrier to us. So for me, one of the priorities is trying to eliminate that barrier. So this is the thing that I'm really most excited about. When I started, this was 18 months ago. This is very rough and ready, I know, but this is Barb knows why it's rough and ready. This is our interim page where 18 months ago I was working with Leeds, Coventry, Sheffield, and York universities, and we've got all the librarians together, and they just trawled through all of the open access databases, pulling out textbooks they felt that they would feel comfortable putting in front of an academic and saying, have you considered this? And we ended up through, this is on the our OER UK website, we ended up with about 120 titles that way. We've made them available on these spreadsheets if people want to use them. I think there's a barrier still where librarians, because we are so new in thinking about OERs, they still don't feel confident putting them in front of academics. So that maybe is too big a barrier. So the next step, and the one that we've been working on for the last, I'm going to say month, I want to go back to these events. You'll see at the top on that workshop how to identify OERs on reading lists using Talus and Leganto, so our reading list software. Every library in the UK and Ireland has reading list software because we do aim to provide textbooks for our students. We can just pull them out and identify which ones are OERs just by which open access directories they are in. Um, a colleague of mine, Brunel, Roland Dobson, he works with colleagues at Leeds to just host that workshop. We had 30 librarians from around the country who are interested in how can they do the same? How can they pull out those OERs from their reading lists? And that was 2 weeks ago. In the intervening time, I think there's a spreadsheet that Barb put up on our website. We've now got 150 titles on that spreadsheet of OERs from 6 universities, and I'll put out a call for more next week. But we've got 150 titles now, which are already on reading lists in the UK that we want to share. And we have an arrangement. Karen Lauritsen for the Open Textbook Library has agreed that we can submit those, and they will put in all the records as they currently do for the Open Textbook Library. And then we will be able, for Brunel and Sheffield, we have the rights behind the scenes to identify those ones that would be suitable for the UK and Ireland. So in a couple of weeks, we've already got 150 titles from 6 universities. We had 30 interested in the first place. I've got a connection with Research Plus Library, Research Plus University Libraries. That's a dozen other libraries who are interested in making this process work as well. So it's easy to grow that and just build up that Open Textbook Library UK and Ireland. And where we get to at the moment, we haven't made it live yet, but I'm so pleased with the way it looks. So this is all that the Open Textbook Library have been doing. We currently have 50 titles on this. We haven't made it live at all. This is simply the OERs that are on Sheffield, Coventry, and Brunel's reading lists that behind the scenes, I just click a button and say, these are the ones that are relevant to us. I've got a project with 13 libraries have 13 librarians have volunteered to work with me and Dal Badesha from the University of Coventry. And we will be reviewing everything that comes in before we send it to the Open Textbook Library. It gives them an opportunity to learn how to evaluate textbooks as well and present them to academics. And it will help enrich the Open Textbook Library too. So that's the work that I'm most excited by at the moment. And I think for me, there are some librarians who will be prioritizing the creation of textbooks, and I really want to support them, but I want them to take the lead on that because that's their expertise. For me, this is where I am most able to make a contribution. So I'm really pleased with the way that's going. Right, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to come back to these questions at the end. If anyone has thoughts or comments about those, then I'm more than happy to have a discussion about that. If you want to go off in a completely different direction, that's absolutely fine as well. Okay, I will stop sharing my screen. I just need to find the button to do it. So let's have a look. Okay, there we go.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I see some claps happening. So this is the time where we're open to discussion, questions for David, whether it's those, kind of discussion questions that he laid out or anything that really stood out to you. Feel free to ask. Jen, do you mind if I read? Jen sent me a chat. I'm kind of putting her on the spot. Do you mind if I read this out loud?
You can read it out loud, or I could just ask.
Can you
It
just
doesn't.
ask? Yeah.
Yeah. So we're working on something here. So I'm at Texas A&M, and we are ginormous. We are like over 70,000 students. We're massive, and I'm working on a mapping of the campus. And one of the things that we're doing when we're mapping, in addition to highlighting where we know we have faculty champions in different areas, people that we've worked with, people that we've talked with. We're also trying to find, like you've done with these incredible spreadsheets, where OER is being used. Of course, it's a massive, massive undertaking. but I was just wondering if you had like blank templates for this that you could share that were openly licensed that I could borrow that I could
Um,
use, because I think I've already shared it with, I immediately like grabbed the link and shared it with my team here and said like this is what we need to do as the next step in our mapping project, because we are trying to do an OER matchmaking, and I have set aside money to actually match faculty members with unreviewed or low reviewed OER, to pay them to do a public facing review, because I think it's a really great way to get OER in front of people who may not have considered it before. Because I could say, look, I'll give you $500 if you'll read this book and do a public facing review of it. And then they get the opportunity to kind of like dig through that book and say like, oh, wow, this isn't crap, even though it's openly published and not from Pearson or Simon and Schuster or whoever, right? So we'll definitely be using your spreadsheets just to come up with ideas for that matchmaking, but also to build our own if you have templates.
So I'm more than happy to share them. They are, I don't think they're particularly grand, but you are more than happy to use them. So yeah, that's not a problem. I think, by the way, for Joe and Helen, did you hear in the background there that casual mention we can pay an academic $500 to review a textbook? That's something we're not able to do in the UK, and it's always proved a barrier to us.
Yeah, that I came
But
from
it is a
a much
relatively
smaller
common
regional
thing. It's
institution where we had,
relatively common is
yeah, we had no money at my last institution. So this is so weird for me to be able to actually reward faculty, because I've always said OER is free for students, but the academic labor that goes into OER is not free, and that faculty should be compensated in some way. So to be at an institution that actually puts up money for that is a gift, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm happy to share those templates. Um, so Barb, we will I'll make a note of that because you're going to have to help me to do that. I'm wondering if I could put Helen on the spot a little bit. So I'm just because we're talking about community, aren't we? And for Sheffield, particularly when we started, you have the White Rose community of libraries. Um, can you maybe just share your experience with them?
Absolutely. So the White Rose Universities network is, I suppose, a network of just three universities, but we are close in proximity. So the University of Leeds is only about 40 miles away. The University of York is, I'm not too sure, maybe about 60 miles away. And then we have the University of Sheffield as well. Um, and we've got a long history of collaboration. So we've got a couple of research repositories that we share, and we are looking at perhaps having a learning assets repository as well, but that's still under discussion. And one of the projects we embarked on probably about 5 years ago was what we could do in the OER space. So we did create an open educational resources toolkit. Um, and that was a really good starting point for us, because my experience is when you start talking to people about OER, they want to know, what are they? What are the benefits of using them? Where can I find out more? How do I find OER? And we had nothing. So it was really helpful doing that. I suppose going back to Jennifer's point, the way we found out about who was interested in OER, we did a survey, firstly with as a White Rose group of libraries. We didn't get many respondents, but it was a starting point. And then we followed it a couple of years later with a survey just at the University of Sheffield. And we had over 200 responses to that survey, which was good for us. Um, and we asked people to indicate if they were interested in speaking further about OER. And that became a jumping off point. So from that, we were able to create an OER working group as well. So it's been hugely beneficial having that community, local community.
And actually, thank you, Helen. There's something has occurred to me. Did you say your name? Were you Jenny or Jennifer? Was it Jenny or
Jennifer.
Jennifer?
Jennifer.
Jennifer. Okay, I must have misheard. I won't call you Jenny. So
Oh, you can
Jennifer,
call
I
me
was
Jen, but not Jenny.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. So Jen, one of the things that, as you were talking about it, that it prompted me to think, I was talking earlier on about, so the different experience that all these things I carried with me as a UK librarian going to the US and all the differences that we had. And you're even there, just in that throwaway comment, there's a difference in the way that you can work in the US to the UK. Um, this is where I think it's really helpful to be this is something I did very early on when I was at King's College London as a librarian. I would look at what are they doing in the US, and what are they doing in Australia when it comes to information literacy teaching, things like that. One of the things that I suppose we can make a virtue in the UK out of the limitations on what we can do to engage faculty. So where I was talking about how we support academics is we can give them, as Leeds did, postgraduate research time, or we can find a way to fund time for their teaching so that they can take time away from their teaching responsibilities to spend on authorship. So a lot of what we are doing is trying to work within those very tight confines of what we are allowed to do. So we take a completely different approach. I would love to be able to take the approach that you're able to. We did that in San Luis Obispo, and I remember thinking, "Wow, no wonder we have a classroom full of academics." So it's worth having a look at some of the things that we are doing differently as well, as we're looking very closely at what it is that you're doing. Can I go back to one of the earlier questions? So I talked about assumptions, and I also mentioned halfway through the presentation as well, when it comes to collection development policies, does that ring true with anyone here that your collection development policies, I'm going to say, don't match necessarily with your ambitions? Or, yeah, I'll start with that. Do they match your ambitions? I love this feeling, by the way. When you're in a classroom and you see where people's heads just turn slightly, it's like, if I do that, I'm invisible. No one will ask. It's absolutely fine not to have a point of view on that yet. I have thrown it out there, but it's something I'm really interested in. And I'm separate to OERs. So I mentioned also, I'm trying now to collaborate with colleagues in different institutions, get a bit more capacity to do things. One of the things I'm working on with University of Essex, University of Hull, is let's have a look at our collection. I'm going to say collection philosophy, our collection principles, and then really go from that high level down to thinking about what it is that we are doing right with our collection policies to meet our long-term goals. So it's something I put out there because I'd be really interested in just talking to people who have a completely different work experience and come at it a completely different way. They can challenge the way that we think about our collections, the things we take for granted. That would be really valuable to me. So I'm just throwing that out there.
I can mention we looked at our collection policy, collection development policy a couple of years ago. Of course, we've embedded the language in there because now with all of the other changes that have come, I haven't had an opportunity to step back from it to see what the impact would be. We're still at the stage of trying to put out surveys to get more data on the faculty members who are using it. We've opened it up. It's like it's a lot of moving pieces to say one thing works because now something new has been added to it. So that's been like the frustration in getting a hold of all of the changes that are now occurring. And as you mentioned with the faculty, you have staff who have so many hats, and because our libraries are getting smaller with the amount of people we have employed, the tasks are growing larger. So it's just that feeling like you're not really meeting the mark because there's so many different things on a given day that we're incorporating into this work, without saying, the latest conversation we've had was how to touch the faculty members and to embed OER as a part of tenure and promotion, and just hoping that that would give more buy-in for participating in it. We've done stipends over the years. We've had through the Open Textbook Network, um, faculty members who have reviewed OER. So it's been a lot of these different methods that have been used, but I can't say that they've been where I could see the fruits of them.
Yeah, that's as you were talking about policy, one of the things, again, Barb will know this. Our barrier at Brunel is we don't we don't know what a policy is. So it's a very strange experience where you want to have a mandate to say, just as you're saying, we want that to be included in the promotion criteria. But here we're not used to having mandates for academics coming from professional services. But we talk about it, but all those barriers that we have, sometimes I think it's helpful to have that conversation, be honest about what those barriers are. And I see, Robin, you have your hand up, so go for it.
Yeah, speaking from my last position as a library director, which I had for many more years than the 2 days I've had this position, um, we one of the things that helped us at a small public university where so before I became library director, the library had a policy that we don't buy textbooks. It was like one of the few policies we had, like thanks for making that. Um, And it was really our student government that we enlisted to do several things to help us. They helped us pass an OER resolution with the faculty that I had been trying to pass for like years, but until the students came forward, the faculty were like, don't tell me what to do, but the students got a very different reception. And we also had some luck with student assignments where students were reviewing textbooks as part of capstones and courses where they had just learned the content. Now they were looking at, because the faculty, we didn't have money to pay them to do it. They didn't have time to do it. And so we enlisted students. Once we had pretty active knowledge and student buy-in, we were able to kind of backwards design around our faculty and and since you guys are building this kind of groundswell, and it's really hard to get students to participate because of the turnover right there. It's difficult, but bringing them into these kinds of planning meetings sometimes gets you, I found both talking to admin and talking to faculty, there was a lot of help there. I think someone just put in the chat, what does that resolution look like? I will dig it out and stick it in the chat in a second. But yeah, it was unanimously passed at our faculty meeting. And I mean, that it was like my 50th time at faculty meeting talking about OER. Never got close before. And then the students came and they're like, you know what we should do? And the faculty were like, that's brilliant.
It only takes one
I think
time to get everybody else on.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like the more elite your institution is, in some ways, the harder that is because at the institutions that are really committed to serving students, to equity, to teaching, they really care about those student voices, I think, and you can ride that pretty far into your library policy and such. But anyway, I'll dig that out.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. And already, Joe, Helen, we'll be talking about this next Friday. That sounds really interesting. Thank you.
So I can once again speak from a position of privilege here, but also talk about what I did at my previous institution. We also had an SGA resolution, which is what really helped spur faculty to do it. I was actually just kind of Googling, trying to find our resolution as well. I have it somewhere saved in a Google Drive. But here, when you were talking about collection development policies, and it started before I came, like about 6 months before I started working here, our collection development moved to an ebook purchase program for every required textbook. If we can get it as an unlimited user ebook, we purchase it. We get the book list from the bookstore as soon as it's finalized, and that means it's never finalized because faculty never get things in on time. Not to throw faculty under the bus, right? But then we get updates, and we actually have one person in our collection development department. Her name is Winter White, and she goes through that every single semester, and she purchases everything that we don't already own as an unlimited ebook if it is available. And then we email those professors and say, hey, please let your students know, put it on your syllabus. They don't have to purchase this textbook. The library has purchased it for them. And then she sends all of that to somebody on my team here in Open Ed who manages, she's our reserve services coordinator, and all of those books get automatically put on reserve for students. So when students log into their library portal, they can pull up it automatically says, here are your reserves for all of your classes. And they can go in and see every book that's been put on reserve, whether it's a physical or a digital reserve. So that's all done automatically. Like, we don't reach out to professors and say, hey, tell us what you're using, or, do you want us to purchase it? It is a purchase first. If we can afford it, if it's available as an unlimited book, we just automatically purchase it. And you were talking about like data to show the difference. I'm going to post in here, thanks to Jeff Gallant for his inspiration for data dashboards. This is our data dashboard, and you can see from our purchasing dollars, we've saved students over $5 million, and our return on investment is $7 per student. And then you can see our ebook and reserve usage from that as well. So it's a really important program.
So thank you, Jen. I'm going to have a look at that. I want to talk more about it, but we have 20 seconds left. So Barb, I better hand over to you.
Thank you. And Christine, can you squeeze something in the chat maybe? I saw your hand up.
I can go super fast. First of all, that dashboard, amazing. That's wonderful. So just to tag on this collection development policy thing before we're completely out of time, we've been all electronic since long before I joined my institution, even though I've been here for 8 years. That's fine. So what we're finding nowadays is that even if the ebooks are available with unlimited users, they don't come with the videos and ancillary materials that they do if you bought the book yourself as an individual. So we're having a hard time selling the library licensed copy to the faculty members because they're missing all of that ancillary content. So that's a new thing that we've run into, and all of the work I've done to show how much money we're saving is kind of falling apart. So I would love to dive more into that in the future. So thank you again for this.
Yeah, no, and thank you. I think this is a good reminder that the Google group is a space for us to continue these conversations. Definitely. I wish we had more time. Thank you so much, David, for sharing today, and Helen and Joe for being here as well. We're really excited about this collaboration. Melita is going to drop the link to the website for the OER Community of Practice for the UK and Ireland in the chat, as well as an evaluation for today's session. And ideas for future community conversations. And just stay tuned for more. Hopefully this planted some seeds. Like David mentioned, we want to be kind of engaging across communities more. So if you've got thoughts or questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I can always bring that to the next advisory group meeting. But again, thank you so much, David, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.